On a very serious topic as we begin here on Indiana in the Morning, the voice of Indiana County, WCCS AM 1160, 101.1 FM. Dr. Ralph May, Jerry Overman Jr., and the topic is suicide. Ralph, good morning. You sent me a very comprehensive presentation that you had done earlier this year about suicide rates and particularly focusing in upon Indiana County. The easy question is to say, is it worse now than it's ever been, or are these numbers that we should expect?
Well, I think, and I'll let Jerry weigh in on this as well, Todd, but we're seeing a general increase in the suicide rate in the United States, and Indiana County is no exception. We're now losing over 45,000 people a year to suicide in the United States. And since 1999, it's gone up. The scary thing for me, it's gone up 24% since 1999, and we know certain populations are affected differently. The middle-aged male population, and we're seeing this in Indiana County, and Jerry can talk about this, is the population that we're seeing locally that's more differentially affected. We've seen the increase in the rate in our area in particular, and this population's the toughest population to get in. Men aren't usually prone to seek services, seek counseling, reach out for help. I mean, that shows up. Men just don't reach out for help. Men just don't like to go to doctors. They don't like to reach out for help, and this presents a real obstacle, and we're seeing that in the suicide rate.
Over a 10-year period, you cite numbers. Men ages 35 to 64, by far the leading category of suicides, 43 of them. Dr. Jerry Overman, you're with us here this morning, Indiana County Coroner as well. You see this in your work too.
Yes, I do. And the trends are very difficult to try to determine. Or trends are actually, they change through time. If we look at this year so far, most of these have been elderly males. All right. I've not had a female commit suicide this year. Mm-hmm. They've all been elderly males. When I say elderly, you're talking the majority of them are 65 and above. Okay, out of 7 suicides, 4 of those are in a range of 65 to 83, and then you put in there a 21-year-old, a 26, and a 52.
Yeah.
So as Dr. May said, it's the middle age, and I mean we're looking now that it's just swinging. The trend right now is elderly.
Mm-hmm. And that's consistent with what's happening nationally. We still know the highest risk population for suicide, and this has been consistent since I got in the business 40 years ago, is elderly white males. This group has consistently been the highest suicide risk band nationally and locally. What we're seeing, though, is an increase in the middle-aged male population. So the news is that you're in a high-risk population when you're a middle-aged guy. It's not going to get any better when you become older. You become in a higher risk population. And these populations are very difficult for us to reach, Todd. I mean, that's one of the challenges I think the Suicide Task Force is facing is, and I don't want to minimize, by the way, the suicide risk to females, suicide risk. The adolescent female rate has gone up 200%. Now, in a sheer number of deaths by suicide, that's smaller than male deaths, but that's increasing as well. I mean, you've got these particular groups that are experiencing an increase in suicide risk, and we have to look at how we reach those particular groups. I think that's what's changing. We got to figure out a way to reach these particular groups of people.
The number this year, Jerry, you cited 7 so far, and looking at the averages over the 10 years, 12 per year, so that number's not far off in terms of this year. But when you're dealing with that sample size, that's not a great large sample size, so, drawing conclusions about whether the first half of the year has been worse or not than other years. Probably not the way to go. But the question becomes, are there seasonal things that take effect? Is winter a worse time? Is the holiday season a worse time? What are those factors that Ralph was talking about, and what are you see them from the raw number standpoint?
Yeah, I see majority of the time around the holiday season. And holiday season that I would be talking about would be Thanksgiving, Christmas, New Year's. Mm-hmm. And I don't know if Dr. Meg would shed any more light on it, but that seems to be where we see, in our office, we see an increase. And now just remember, I mean, the numbers we're talking about here are completed suicides. This isn't the people that's maybe contemplating or attempted, so that this number here is a very small piece of the large piece that's out there.
Right.
The large pie that's there. This is just one little slice of it. But it's interesting that when you look at this, the majority of these males are either never married or divorced.
How about that?
And I mean, that
that's the social support issue of how men do not really have strong social supports. When they do have social supports, it's insulation. It doesn't prevent, but it provides protective insulation. But when you lose relationships, men are particularly vulnerable in middle age and late age, that when you lose supportive relationships, when you lose your spouse or you lose, your family, you're particularly vulnerable at that point because you start asking questions: why am I here? What am I here for? What's the purpose? And that sends you down that track that can lead to suicide. Not necessarily, but it increases the risk.
Mm-hmm. As we think about, as Jerry was talking about seasonal factors, Ralph, I would guess that the fact that there are so many family gatherings in those holiday seasons, even when the larger family gets together and that male who is contemplating suicide, we're talking about that person in particular at this moment, but could be anybody who is contemplating suicide, when they're together with their large families, that can actually make someone feel even more isolated.
They feel more isolated because they don't feel connected, and they don't feel like, and when you're in that, and I hate to use the term suicide brain, but I think it's caught on, that the person in that mindset has gone down a road where they think that their death will actually be a positive for their family, a positive for society, because they don't see themselves as having any worth or meaning anymore. So they can be in a room full of people, and people are laughing, people are engaged, and they can seem fine. Mm-hmm. But they're totally in their mind disengaged from what's going on. They're not registering it the same way. Mm-hmm. And I think that confuses people because they think, well, they seem fine.
Yeah.
But they're not. They're disconnected. They're not communicating about how they really feel.
Jerry, you see the cost to families when somebody does commit suicide. And Ralph, you see it as well when people even attempt it but are unsuccessful at it. The stress on a family when someone has done that is more than just long term. It's lifelong, isn't it?
Yes, it is. And I try to tell the family that your normalcy is now changed forever. It's never going to come back. There is so much devastation on family members. There's some things I'd like to tell you, but confidentiality, I can't go there. Mm-hmm. Things I've seen, things that I've heard, and I tell you, it breaks your heart. You lose sleep over because of the facts that the way some of the stuff plays out, some of the things that you hear, and sometimes, believe it or not, when you listen to the family talk, you can actually hear some of the things that may have been bothering them. Mm-hmm. Like Dr. May's a resource that we use to reach out to see if there's been any type of mental illness or other prior suicide attempts or anything like that that's maybe changed the environment or in their personal life. You get back to one of the things about the trends, just so you know how trends go. 5 years ago, we had 6 suicides in 1 month. Okay, really caught us off guard. Really? It caught the whole county off guard. Mm-hmm. So to throw that in there, the trends, there's not a good trend to look at.
Yeah.
I know that right now you have a couple celebrities. We always worry about that in the suicide task force.
Contagion.
Because you can get contagion where it's going to kick in.
Yeah.
But the families are obviously beyond devastated.
Families feel responsible. They feel guilt. They feel like, how many times have we heard, we should have seen something. We should have known something. We should have done something.
How did I fail?
How did I fail?
What did I miss?
What did I miss? Mm-hmm. And so the individual who dies by suicide doesn't see the impact the suicide has after the fact. I think if they saw the impact, it would have mediated their decision making. They're blind to the fact that they're still dropping a huge rock into a small pond. Yeah. And those impacts are going to be indefinite. Those impact and when you have a suicide in a family, we know the risk for suicide in the extended family and social network goes up, because that kind of sense that if that person died by suicide, somehow that is a solution or a way things are solved or something that we do. And so the impact of suicide is not only the immediate impact of the guilt, but it's the long-term impact it has on the family and friends and social structure. With adolescents in particular, Todd, we have to be careful because when there's an adolescent suicide, the suicide rate in that group, that cohort, that friends and acquaintances class, goes up for 6 years.
Yeah. I was going to bring that up next. You both used the term contagion a couple of moments ago, a few years ago. Maybe this was what you were referring to, Jerry. There seemed to be a spate of student suicides. One student committed suicide, and then they seemed to fall like dominoes after that.
There are a given number of people at risk, at any point in time. This is not going to take somebody who is basically doing okay and make them suicidal, but individuals who are on the cusp who are struggling. We know 20% of kids in Indiana County in a recent survey report significant depression and wondering if they want to live or not. 20% of kids surveyed in the school. You know, and that's 20%. I mean, I can't wrap my mind around that number. You know, and so those kids are at risk. So when a child or a peer or an acquaintance or a celebrity dies by suicide, it kind of makes it, well, if they can't make it, how can I make it?
Yeah.
And so it adds the fuel to the fire. It's contagion is a very serious issue.
Yeah. Is it worse because it is a young developing mind as opposed to an older mind?
It's different in the sense that the younger mind is still struggling to find an identity, find a purpose, find meaning. So this whole, I mean, being an adolescent is a time of intense emotion. So when you're struggling with things anyway, and you heap on these other things, it adds stress and can fracture the person and really produce a high risk for suicide.
Yeah, and Jerry, of course, you see the parents having to live with that and what that must be and do to them.
Yes, it's very devastating to parents. And, you know, some things out of it, I've built relationships with some of these family members, you know, because of this. You know, I made some really good friends out of this, but, you know, they're never the same. The families are never the same. I mean, I knew some prior to the suicide. I know them after, and they're different. You know, I mean, their goal in life now has changed. Hard to understand, and that's what I struggle with a lot of times, is trying to give a family an answer why. You know, because as a human being, we always want to know why, right? I mean, we always want to know why something happens. And I can't go back and say, well, this is what we know and this is why.
Yeah.
There's just no answer there. Yes, we can sit down and we can discuss and maybe come up with some ideas, it could be, but it's never a concrete answer to say.
Does it occur that someone who dies from a heroin overdose may actually have been committing suicide?
That is very high. There's some reports on that, and I don't recall the percentage, but there is a very high percentage that very well could be. But you got to also remember that people that's addicted, a lot of times they just don't care anymore.
Right.
They just give up because it's like, you know, they need to get high. They don't really care about life. It's not that they want to be suicidal. They just don't care anymore. And whatever, you know, they look at whatever comes out of it. I think that's a very hard one to, I mean, it's very difficult for me to determine without a note or other suicidal thoughts, was it an overdose or was it a suicide by overdose? You know, so it's very difficult.
And when Jerry looks at that, and I appreciate his diligence so much in looking at each individual person and family and trying to help, but I would suspect the mindset of a lot of individuals who overdose, they may not be in the sense suicidal, but they just don't care if they live anymore. Yeah. And so if you add those individuals, you're talking about adding tens of thousands of individuals to individuals really dying because they didn't want to live anymore.
Gentlemen, I sadly believe that we're only about partway down the road here on this topic. We need to get you back in here as quickly as possible to talk about this. Until we do, let's give folks an idea of the resources that are out for them if they are considering suicide.
Indiana County has a centralized crisis number that we work very hard to establish. It is 1-877-333-2470. That number rings 24/7, 365 days a year by a person, a therapist, who will talk to you. It doesn't have to be you calling. You can call for someone because you're concerned. That phone will answer. We will figure out what needs to be done. We can send out mobile help to you if you need it and connect you with other resources like the Guidance Center or other services if you need counseling or psychiatric treatment. So there's really no reason not to reach out. It's confidential. You don't have to give your name. It's always answering.
Gentlemen, let's get you in here real soon.
Thank you, Todd.
It's WCCS.
The fastest growing satellite company in PA, SeaWorld Satellites, is hiring installers. No